Believe in fairies? What do you say, more?
You wouldn't get a man, woman or child to disbelieve in them.
Now you're talking.
And I'm sure there are a few yarns, so...
Yarns? I could tell you yarns all night about fairies, and 3 yarns at that. Would you like to hear a yarn?
I would.
What?
I certainly
I
would.
would all like to hear that.
Well, now, I know of several cases, but I think this one here would interest you. I know of a man, a returned Irish-American, who bought a farm. And on this farm, there are a lot of what we call skearks. That's fairy thorns growing. Some of them in the middle of fields. So he went to a blacksmith, and he bought some picks, and he got them sharp to the blacksmith, and the blacksmith asked him what he wanted to do. And when he told the blacksmith he wanted to tear out the fairy thorns, the blacksmith advised him on no account to touch them, that no good would come of it. Well, in spite of all his neighbours could do to dissuade him from interfering with these skearks, he took them all out. Now that man was a fine, strong, healthy farmer, and his hair was as black as a raven. And he went to bed the night that he took out the last thorn. He went to bed in perfect health. The next morning he woke with his hair as white as snow, a babbling lunatic, and he died in the asylum.
And that terrible old God.
We all know stories of fairies and banshees, of leprechauns and uncanny events. They are, for the most part, acquired in childhood, yet somehow they linger. We harbour belief. And is it because we learn them so early that they ever retain some slight flavour of fact? Or does this go deeper? Can we not dismiss them, forget them, ignore them, because they were there before ever we knew? Whether or not we are surrounded by beings we cannot always perceive, we're certainly surrounded by people that believe we are. The Irish fondness for the gentry that live in the hill is not merely an aspect of shillelagh and shamrock Irishness we turn on at will to entertain a visitor. Some indeed will only discuss such matters after great persuasion. But we all know a man that knew the man whose hair turned white overnight. We all know the whereabouts of a thorn tree that no one will disturb, and have all seen spilled food left for the fairies. Didn't everybody's grandmother forbid the carrying of blossom into the house, lest they become angry? The leprechaun, the trickster we might trick, the austere people of the hill that we dare not try to trick, the wailing woman, the banshee, whose coming is an omen of death. Either they all speak to an inner need, or they are its voice, its manifestation. In every generation, every age, the faith endures. And yet at every telling we hear that fairies are fewer now. All this was long ago. The assertion exists in the earliest written accounts in the English language, and we hear it still. At different times, in different places, the disappearance of fairies has been attributed to the Church, the Reformation, the building of factories. The authorities range from Geoffrey Chaucer to Charlotte Bronte. But other authorities, and earlier, our Irish Christian writers of the early medieval period, identify them quite definitely. They are the Tuatha De Danann, people of the goddess Dalle, a tall and beautiful people that came from the Western Sea, a magical people, capable of invisibility and enjoying eternal life in another world, where all is plenty. It's true that these pious scribes sometimes classed them with Christianity's evil demons, but they certainly did not dismiss the presence of another race inhabiting Ireland. Sometimes they are called gods of the earth. Elsewhere they are said to be gods but not gods, which certainly makes them something other than human. They were not replaced by new invaders. They simply retired to their palaces beneath the ground. And though the people of Ireland embraced Christianity, they did not allow it to supplant what they already knew. They contrived to integrate their ancient culture with the new learning, where the classical world and the biblical already overlapped. The people of the hills seem to have walked the surface of the earth less frequently, but they were neither forgotten nor ignored, and an intermittent acquaintance has always continued. In our own time, the greatest enemy of sightings of sprites, fairies and elementals is the ESB. Since the advent of rural electrification, country people, the traditional pool of all such lore, admit that sightings have decreased. And yet we all know a man that knew the man. And we're warned to speak with care of the people of the hill, and seldom say their name. They are instead the gentry, the good people, the gentlefolk. They are they. And as the daylight draws in, we're all as able as each other in recalling occurrences that can best be explained by our having brushed against, however briefly, the beings of the other world. And we're all aware that as the day is meant for humankind, the night belongs to them. So if we travel back beyond the beginning of the power lines to the world lighted by moon and stars, by candle and turf fire, how far must we go to trace the roots of the beliefs that we are so reluctant to reject entirely? The folklore collectors of the turn of the century, just before almost universal literacy, were able to meet and record an astonishing number of primary oral sources. William Butler Yeats, who dealt first-hand in mysticism, Lady Gregory, who left us a respectable body of otherwise unwritten lore, Evans Wentz, who prepared much ground for the anthropologist and psychologist. Though succeeded by more systematic scholars, these probably remain the best-known names of those who've recorded the stories previously passed on only by word of mouth, though there is sometimes the suspicion that the amateur and the romantic might be told whatever may be thought to best please. The image of tiny people with a king and queen in miniature court is a late invention, which we owe, with much else that is now deep in the psyche of all English-speaking peoples, to the vision of Mr. William Shakespeare. Yet even he borrowed his Queen Mab from our Queen Maeve. And this was by no means the first cross-cultural exchange, for our Leprechaun, so uniquely Irish we would like to believe, is found in English folklore of the 15th century as the Leprechaun. And the tap-tapping of his little hammer as he makes shoes? Well, that surely is a late development, for before the mid-17th century, all shoes were stitched together rather than nailed. And what about the midget shoemaker well known in Spain? As we don't seem to have imported him with our Milesian ancestors, perhaps we sent him there with our wild geese. But if two widely separated peoples encounter the same fairy folk, and there are many such parallels around Europe, might they not be dealing with the same elemental forces, either of the earth they inhabit or found within the human self? Do fairies dwell then in the subconscious to be produced in whatever clothing fits the fancy of the time? Did ancient gods become the champions of our heroic age, or our heroes become gods? Might the well-known discomfiture of fairy people caused by contact with iron tell us of a Bronze Age culture which fell to an Iron Age invasion of new technology? And might displaced peoples represented by their dead, buried in funeral mounds or fairy forts, become in story the people who live under the hill? The fairy folk of earlier Irish tradition, on the Ascolta, the people of the hills, exist in a timeless world. They're neither human nor angel. They're little concerned with human affairs, except when such matters disturb their own existence. And they are ignorant of human morality. Wherever the good people are known, it's agreed that they live close to the earth and hold it in reverence, as did our own earliest ancestors. The passage of night and the rising of the sun, the returning of the seasons, the renewal of growth, all matters of wonder, all occasions to placate or celebrate the spirits of the earth. Storytelling is the oldest Irish art. Its great canon of heroic tales in the Irish language informs us of an aristocratic Iron Age society with a warrior elite. They were themselves subject to spells and were liable to slip into the other world. And if their exploits are recalled, it's sometimes as much a caution as a celebration. There are many stories of those who were taken. Some say because the fairy folk from time to time need an infusion of new blood. There are others of people led astray in what should have been a familiar walk. The banshees that attend certain families have sometimes followed them from ancestral lands to new homes in the city, and sometimes even across oceans. And if such stories sometimes seem mere fragments, plotless and lacking any lesson, it's because they are mere parts of a whole too great for our perception.
There was an old woman.
Away with the fairies? We say that still when someone seems unconscious of the company they are in. And that was often how the fairy's victim was left. The soul away with the people on the hill, and the body left behind, or sometimes a strange body left instead, possibly an old hag that could only be got rid of if the abductee was somehow brought home. In the early tales, the heroes sometimes found themselves in Tir na Nog, the land of eternal youth, where night was day and winter became summer. And when they'd spent a night there and emerged into their own world, they discovered that 1,000 years had passed, and all they knew had passed away.
In
the townland where my grandmother grew up, there was a woman, and she, a class of a cousin of her own, was taken away by them folk that live in the hills. One day she was gone, and she was seen no more, neither next nor near to the home place. And 2 Christmases went by before her husband was bringing in cattle from beyond the Rath, and who should he meet but his wife? "What are you doing here, good woman?" says he. "Now come along home." "Indeed I cannot," she told him, "for they have me under a spell, and there is but one way to break it." She told him he must wait till the next full moon, when the fairies would be travelling and she with them, and he must stand behind the hedge with a twig of rowan in his hand. He must strike her horse with it, and the spell would be undone. Well, the night of the full moon came, and he stood hidden where she told him, and as time went by he heard pipe music and the sound of horses. He burst through the hedge, and was so frightened by the hundreds of fairies that he dropped his rowan twig. His wife's horse bolted, and the whole fairy band followed after her. The next day there was no sign of them at all, only a blood stain on the grass, and the same man never saw his wife again.
Agus níor leag an fear a bhfuil a bhean riamh arís.
At times, the way to the Middle Kingdom was sometimes found open, and those that passed through it, and most especially those that ate food there or slept with its women, may find themselves trapped until released by further magic or by Judgment Day, when the she, having no souls, will cease to be. When fairy folk are together in great numbers, they are indeed a danger to the country people, for they are all equipped for war and may kill or maim those unlucky enough to meet them. And even in the recently told tales of such hostings, the protagonists are of the ancient breed, for we hear of Munster fighting the men of the north or Ulster fighting Connacht. There is more than a remnant of the epics being retained here in the continuing tradition. These supernatural hosts roam far and wide and appear in folk tales throughout Europe. They might include the dead and certain disembodied souls, the demons of Christianity, or the more homely ghosts of huntsmen that are condemned for sporting on a Sunday. Another Christian strand to such a story has St. Columkill doing aerial battle with a regiment of devils for the soul of an unbaptized king. Much akin to these warring hosts is the wild hunt that rides through the night, leaving devastation behind it. And whether composed of our gentrified Irish fairies or the souls of the damned, is as fearsome a mass of superhumanity as may be met.
Chóla mi si gominnig, gomidi si trid, timple the fauna in I'm sure an oer.
I often heard that they'd fight in November at the time of harvest. And my father told me that in the year of the famine there was great fighting heard up in the sky. And they were crying out, "Black potatoes, black potatoes, we'll have them now." I suppose it was one tribe of them fighting against another for them. And the oats in that year were all black as well as the potatoes.
Socrú at the féin, conas edvilidi sin in almananacher. Agus mar a hárle, vi an chwerke, há dóv leis na prádaí an bblion sin.
If you meddle with the ancient race of Sidhe, you will, and almost surely, be undone. But there are lesser beings that allow more latitude in human behaviour. The leprechaun, who tempts his victims with a pot of gold, but seldom surrenders it, is a trickster. There may be outbursts of bad temper, but he seems able to take as much as he serves to others. The origin of the tiny shoemakers has been sought in the remnants of a displaced people. It has been suggested that they may at first have been a bronzesmiths who were supplanted by a wave of ironworking settlers, and that they are the little people because a conquering race always attempts to diminish that which it replaces. The leprechaun is invariably associated with a pot or a bag of gold, which he keeps specifically in case he should need a ransom. If he's caught by a human, he can be made to surrender it to secure his release. Almost always, though, his captor is induced to relax his grip or even take his eye off the little man just for a moment, and the leprechaun and treasure vanish on the instant.
Vi dinne den slue ski going så tig effekt hammel. Vi med direk tarish and venture force.
We had one of them in the house for a while. It was when I was living up at Ticknock, and it was just after I married that woman there. That was a nice slip of a girl at that time. It was in the winter and there was snow on the ground, and I saw one of them outside and brought him in and put him on the dresser. And he stopped in the house for a while, for about a week. It was more than that. It was 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe it was. I'm not sure. He was about 15 inches high and he was very friendly. It's likely he slept on the dresser at night. When the boys at the public house were full of porter, they used to come to the house to look at him, and they would laugh to see him, but I never let them hurt him. They said I would be made up and he'd bring me some riches, but I never got them. We had a cage here. I wish I'd put him in it. I might have kept him till I was made up. It was a cage we had for a thrush. We thought of putting him into it, but he wouldn't have been able to stand in it. I'm sorry I didn't keep him. I thought sometimes to bring him into Dublin to sell him. You wouldn't have got him there. Such hope as the leprechaun may offer of wealth one way or the other, he seldom leaves his human foil much better off. There are, however, other benevolent spirits that may seek you out in dreamland and point you more surely on the way to riches. But there's dreams and dreams. I heard of a man from Mayo went to Limerick and walked 2 or 3 times across the bridge there. And a cobbler was sitting on the bridge, took notice of him, and knew by the look of him and by the clothes he wore that he was from Mayo, and asked him what he was looking for. And he said that he had a dream that under the bridge of Limerick he'd find treasure. Well, said the cobbler, I had a dream myself about finding treasure, but in another sort of place than this. And he described the place where he dreamed it was. And where was that? But in the Mayo man's own garden. So he went home again, and sure enough, there he found a pot of gold with no end of riches in it. But I never heard that the cobbler found anything under the bridge at Limerick. Part of the coast of the County Wicklow was anciently called the land of the sea goddess, and certain families thereabouts claim descent from mermaids. As there are spirits of the hills, the trees and the rivers, so coast dwellers are aware of the spirits of the sea, for it's not only in Wicklow that they appear. There was a man I heard of in the County Sligo, a fisherman long ago, and he caught a mermaid up in his net, and she was that tired from struggling to get out of it, he was able to bring her into the boat. He carried her home and married her. But he was only able to keep her there by taking the tail of her and hiding it away. They were married for many years and she had 3 fine children by him, but she was always thinking she would go back to the sea if she ever found her tail. One day when the fisherman was at his work, their daughter found the tail shut away in a box under the thatch. She showed it to her mother, who straight away put it on and went back to the sea and took the daughter with her and left her 2 sons to the father. And their clan are there yet, and I know their name as well as I'd know my own. Some say that the mermaids are fallen angels when Lucifer and the rest were thrown out of heaven. Some of them landed in the sea, and they are the mermaids ye often hear tell of. The harbinger of death, creature of ill omen. The Banshee, or fairy woman, has been documented since the 10th century and is surely of much earlier origin. A warrior meets her at a ford. She's washing his torn and bloody shirt, which will not come clean. Sometimes it is his severed limbs or his entrails that she washes. He knows that he will not survive the coming battle. In our accounts of the death of Cuchulainn, the hero meets her as a young and beautiful woman washing his spoils where the road meets the river. Although he knows that he's going to his death, he refuses to turn back. Again he meets her as a hag, roasting dog flesh on a spit. Again she appears as a crow. Some versions of her name call her Crow or Hawk, the birds of the battlefield. In more recent times, though, we most frequently hear of her as an ancestress spirit, soon to be joined in death by one of her kin. She's usually an old woman, maybe both seen and heard, and is the follower of certain families. Most of such families are Gaelic, some are Gaelicised Norman. She weeps for the passing of one of the old stock.
Chula me an Banshee, agus connic me vi me féin.
I heard the Banshee and saw her. I and 6 others were card playing in the kitchen of the big house that sunk into the ground. She had a white dress, and it was as if held over her face. They all looked up and saw it, and they were all afraid and went back but myself. Then I heard a cry that did not seem to come from her, but from a good way off. And then it seemed to come from herself. She made no attempt to twist a mournful cry, but all she said was, "Oh, oh." But it was as mournful as the oldest of the women could make it, that was best at crying the dead. Old Mr. Shunnock was at Lisdoonvarna at that time, and he came home a few days after and took to the bed and died. Fairy folk foretelling death, fairy folk offered food that they may do us no ill. We find them in the names of hills and rivers. They dwell in the tide. They dwell near certain thorn trees, rats, fords, in the byre and in the butter churn. If we do not placate them, they're capable of doing great harm. If we mention their favour, they may withdraw it. We fear to meet them, and we count as blessings the times we did. It's unsurprising that the Tuatha De Danann, St. Patrick, elements of medieval demonology, imported elves, the unquiet spirits of the dead, the wandering souls of the unbaptized, should all have found the same places of retreat. They survived in the humble homes of the unlettered, in the sometimes civilized drawing rooms of the big house, and in the hills and waters around them. And though with the passing of time, the fine knowledge that had once allowed us to differentiate with certainty between the mysterious and noble race that preceded us, the great She, and the lesser beings, the Sheog, was lost, there survives a truth, that the most invisible race that lives about and beneath us, without and within, provides a means of awakening the spirit, and forces, such as we ourselves create, have no power to displace them.
They were making a path up the mountain, and they were sort of had to bypass a place where there was one of the stakes.
Yeah.
So one of the men that was at the work, he thought that it was very silly. He was one of these sort of fellas, you know, that thought he knew better than anybody else. And whenever the rest of the men were away for their dinner, what does the boy do? He goes and gets a saw and goes up and starts to cut down the skate.
Foolish man.
I think he was, and he learnt that day's cost. Well, the boy goes up and he starts to cut at the skeg, and when the other boys come up after having their dinner, what do you think they found?
What did they find, Jack?
Here was Bob with a saw in his hand, and his hand gripped on it, and could he let it go? Not one bit of it.
And what did they have to do?
They had to prise open the hand and nearly break the saw to do it. And for 9 months after, he couldn't move that hand.
He was a lucky man to get off so lately.